With the majority of free agency in the rearview mirror, let's take a dive back into the simulators for another Mock Draft Monday.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. We're the Locked On Bengals podcast, covering your team every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. You can find us on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcasts. And hit the subscribe button if you're new and you want everyday coverage of the Cincinnati Bengals with analysis and breaking news and all those good things reacted to and broken down right here on this podcast. And today's show, when we're going to be getting into a mock draft Monday sponsored by FanDuel, you can get $200 in bonus bets with any $5 winning bet at FanDuel.com/locked on. And if you're an everyday already, we appreciate you. If you're not, consider joining the club as we ramp up for the NFL draft. All that's left are pro days. That's it. Free agency mostly done. Like I said, we just got pro days to get to. And today we're going to dive back into the simulators, James. We're going to go to the PFF mock draft simulator here and see how free agency has changed things for the Cincinnati Bengals.
I'm excited. I'm excited because we haven't talked draft in a while, and now it's full steam ahead. Maybe the Bengals make a signing or two. If so, obviously we'll cover it, but full steam ahead. It is draft season, baby. We have an idea of what the Bengals' strengths, what their weaknesses are, and I think that they are comfortable enough with their current roster to go BPA in round one. You haven't fired off the simulator yet, but I'll make it very clear here. I think cornerback is in the mix. I think wide receiver is a very, very dark horse. Brock Bowers certainly in the mix at tight end. Obviously, it's trenches. I see trenches all the time. Trenches. That's the favorite. Offensive tackle, I think, is still the favorite. I also think there's a very real scenario where the 18th pick isn't a trench pick because it could play out that way, and we'll see how it plays out today. But I just wanted to throw that out there because there are some scenarios, I think, where the Bengals add a weapon, whether it's Lou Anarumo's secondary or on offense, really, for Joe Burrow and company.
And what we're expecting at the top of the draft is what plays out today in the mock draft simulator for the most part, more or less. There are 4 quarterbacks. There are some receivers. There's a tackle and a tackle and a tackle and a tackle and a tackle. So all the tackles are picked. And you're expecting a wide receiver run, a quarterback run, and a tackle run before the Bengals pick. Not necessarily in the order these players have been picked today. If you are watching on YouTube, you see that Marvin Harrison Jr. made it all the way to pick 8. And, that's just not likely to happen without teams getting very excited and making trades. But Brock Bowers going 1 pick ahead of the Bengals pick in the simulator means we're picking
Jacksonville.
from defensive
Jacksonville, what are you
tackles.
doing? You already have a tight end, and you drafted tight ends last year. See, I think if Bowers makes it to 17, he'll be there at 18. So that's an interesting curveball.
Regardless of who is picked specifically where, which is always a trip with these simulators, Brock Bowers unlikely to be available to the Cincinnati Bengals in most scenarios. It's not impossible. I'm not ruling it out entirely, obviously.
He's more likely than Byron Murphy. Boom. There's the first take.
I think that is a take. I'm not sure if that's something I agree with or not yet. I think that both are somewhat unlikely, but either way, in this particular scenario, Joe Alt, J.C. Latham, Troy Fatanu, Talisa Fuanga, Olu Fashanu are all picked. So the best offensive tackle available, according to PFF's word, is Amarius Mims. There's also Graham Barton, who isn't as much a tackle as he is a positional flex. He can play anywhere in the offensive line, but most think he's best inside from Duke, and Tyler Guyton for first-round tackle prospects. If we kick over and just check out the interior offensive line just for fun, Jackson Powers-Johnson, a guy we've talked about on the show, available, and Zach Frazier, the West Virginia interior offensive lineman, the top 2 options. So to me, we're not looking necessarily at the offensive trenches here the way that tackle run happened early this time around.
No, you're not. And Sua Matia is still available. Morgan from Arizona still available. And I think you look at it that way and you're like, all right, well, hopefully one of them falls to 49. Byron Murphy is available. Johnny Newton is available. Brian Thomas Jr. is available. A.D. Mitchell is available. I think that there's a lot there where you're like, all right, one of these guys makes sense. And to me, it would be hard to pass on Byron Murphy here. It would be hard to pass on Johnny Newton here. Whatever their flavor is, that's the element. Now, if there is one tackle where you look at it and you say, who fits great with Orlando Brown Jr. and Trent Brown, where you don't necessarily need him to start right away, but man, he could be the best tackle in this draft. Marius Mims is still there. And I think that is tempting. I know that it's been a roller coaster as far as where his draft value is. I think there's a very real possibility in this scenario, if it plays out on draft night, that Marius Mims is a Bengal. It would not shock me at all if they look at him and they say, hell yeah, let's get this guy into our system. We don't necessarily have to play him right away, but if he does come in and is ready to go, he can push for the starting job or he can be the swing tackle. I totally get that. For us, at least for me, I don't know about you, Johnny Newton, Byron Murphy, that's where I'm at. And I think we can see what's there at 49 offensive tackle wise. But those are the two guys that make the most sense to me.
Yeah, and I am with many others on Bengals Twitter lately anyway. Maybe this is because Jeff Hobson and Bengals.com recently did a media mock draft where he landed on Johnny Newton and stoked the fire of Bengals Twitter and got that conversation going again.
Wild with that. Like, yeah. Oh, the Bengals are picking Johnny Newton. It was funny. That was fun.
Yeah, I don't think Butch is quite there. I don't think he's seen the draft board. Love him and all the respect in the world to Jeff Hobson, but I don't think he's seen the draft board, guys.
It's not done.
Yeah.
Like, that's the other element of it. It was just weird, the reaction to any mock at this stage. Obviously, it's a fun exercise to discuss different scenarios. And
what are we doing, right?
I mean, it's why we do it.
Yeah.
How many people do you learn? How many players do you learn? How do you get to know them? Well, part of it is mocking them and figuring it out. That's why I mentioned the Amarius Mims scenario, because I don't think we're necessarily considering him here today as we record this on March 24th. I do think a month from now, a little over a month from now when the draft happens, the Bengals could take Amarius Mims in this scenario. And I wouldn't dismiss that. And that's why I had that disclaimer, because I think they may look at it and say, man, there's 5 guys here. Let's trade down and try to add another pick if you can. There's 5 guys here that we have similar grades on. And I don't know if it's 5, but it could be, because they may have Amarius Mims ahead of Johnny Newton, even though a lot of people like Johnny Newton. Are you down to Murphy and Newton right now?
I think that's where I would lead. Just looking at the teams interested in trading up in this particular scenario, Minnesota didn't get up to get their quarterback apparently, and so they still have picks 11 and 23. And so if Minnesota with Cleveland's pick 23 via Houston, we're interested in coming up, I would consider that trade back. We're not going to do that today. That is something I would consider and see what kind of return you could get. The problem with the Vikings trading up is that they don't have other picks this year. Their next pick is 108 because they did trade up for 11 and 23. But that would be like maybe Arizona would have that pick after Minnesota trades up and goes and gets their quarterback. The only other thing I wanted to mention here is Cooper DeJean from Iowa. I wonder what the Bengals would think of him. He's very high on the PFF board, as everybody watching on YouTube can see. He's at 8th on the PFF big board. I really am curious as to what the Bengals would think of Cooper DeJean. I also am curious to know what medical conclusion the Bengals would have drawn on Laiatu Latu from UCLA, the edge rusher there. Because I think if he were healthy and didn't have to medically retire and transfer and do all that stuff at Oregon to UCLA, he'd be seen as a easy consideration for pick 18 here. But I'm on Newton here, James. If it's me, I think he needs to test is kind of the thing we're waiting for. We're waiting to see the full athletic profile, but he's bigger than Murphy and does a lot of the things Murphy does, and wasn't miscast, in my opinion, as Murphy was playing nose tackle in college.
Yeah, I'm with Murphy, or I'm with Murphy if he falls, but I think I would take Newton too. I think the Bengals would take Murphy. Just throwing it out there now. That said, let's take Johnny Newton and see what we can do on day 2 of the NFL draft. We'll get to that coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. So sorry, Kentucky fans, if you had Kentucky making a run. John Calipari, sorry, man, that's rough. That is rough. But you know what's not rough? FanDuel, because FanDuel is going to get you in the action regardless of how your bracket's doing, whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed like my UConn Huskies. You like how I'm claiming them, Jake? Hopefully they keep it rolling today. You can go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Let's go Houday, UConn, Houday, whatever. Dan Hurley, I'm repping you, my man. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Bet until they cut down the nets.
Back into the simulator here in the second round. We have submitted our first round pick of Johnny Newton. And since then, Laiatu Latu went with the very next pick. Graham Barton goes to Pittsburgh. Brian Thomas adds some speed and a size element to the Miami Dolphins. Byron Murphy goes to the always picking the trenches Philadelphia Eagles. Tyler Guyton, just looking at tackles here. Tyler Guyton picked 24th to Dallas, a popular mock landing spot for him. Amarius Mims, 28th, Kingsley Suamataia, 31st, Jordan Morgan, 34th, Roger Rosengarten, who would be the guy that I think you're realistically hoping for in the second round. If you're hoping for a second round tackle, unfortunately picked 41st, a guy that I think we can all agree the Bengals are going to love, and Mike Sandrestrel from Michigan goes 43. And here we are on the clock with the top guy on the PFF board, Zach Frazier, followed by Ladd McConkey, Braden Fisk up there, Roman Wilson up there, Chris Braswell up there, Ricky Pearsall up there, and kind of the last of the edge defenders before there's a real cliff, Adisa Isaac from Penn State also in consideration. For the defensive interior, since we picked a guy there, we don't need one here, was Fisk and Rook Orororo, whose name we've learned how to pronounce since the last time we tried to say it on this podcast, the next two guys at defensive interior. But if you're hoping for a tackle, James, we might be out of luck.
Yeah, and this is kind of the scenario where it's like, would you rather have Johnny Newton and Blake Fisher, Patrick Paul, Johnny Newton and pass on offensive tackle, or would you rather have Amarius Mims and Rook Orororo? I mean, for me, I want a row your boat all day long because I want to hear Dan Hort say that on the Bengals radio broadcast. Braden Fisk as well is obviously someone that's popular. But this scenario highlights what I've mentioned to you. And obviously, we've been focused on free agency on the pod. But when I look at sort of the sweet spot to find the long-term T. Higgins replacement, it really does feel like pick 49. I think that there's going to be a receiver that falls. It might not be Ladd McConkey, who's there right now, but I do think that there's going to be a receiver that they love in this spot. And that's what's really interesting is adding Trent Brown. It does give you the flexibility to say, all right, let's not force tackle. We have, let's say Johnny Newton's 10th on their board. I don't think he will be, but let's say he is. Let's take the 10th player in Johnny Newton who addresses a need. And now I expect there to be a receiver. If a tackle doesn't fall, especially, I think there will be a receiver that is really high on their board that they have a first round grade on in round 2. And that could be Ladd McConkey. I think that would make a lot of sense. Now the production score isn't going to line up. Is Troy Franklin available? Because that's the one I've been eyeing. That's the guy I like. And I can't see, but Troy Franklin is certainly someone that I would eye. And no, he is gone, which would be a bummer on draft night. The
Troy
Bengals
Franklin
could also say, would you say?
Been picked. No, I was just going to say Troy Franklin was picked 39th along with Xavier Worthy. If you're looking for the next combine 40 record holder to be drafted by the Bengals, and Keon Coleman 42, just for the second round receiver roundup there.
And I think I'm looking at this board, McConkey, Wilson, Pearsall, Burton. They may look at it and say, all right, Malachi Corley's still there. There are a lot of guys there. Polk is there. McMillan is there. Javon Baker's there. Your guy. Let's wait another round. So I could totally see that. The question, Jake, is, all right, what are you waiting for? Is it for Zach Frazier? Do you want to get Ted Karras as a replacement? A guy who might not start right away? Maybe. Is it someone else? I think that's the interesting element here is who are you passing on? Because I think Ladd McConkey would be high on their board and should be higher on their board.
Yeah, McConkey is very interesting here. I was just trying to pull up, if I can find it, his production data because you mentioned it specifically. And I just wanted to see
It
where
doesn't
that
hit.
all
It doesn't hit
comes
where
in.
you would expect him or want him to.
The production is fine until you consider the age adjusted production because he must be an older prospect, 22 and a half. But that's the thing with these Georgia guys. Sometimes these big school guys, sometimes it is late breakouts for them. I mean, that's also true uh for the Javon Baker transfer and then breakout kind of player. And that's going to become more and more common as we see more guys transferring as well. I would be curious there. Zach Frazier is the guy that I have my eye on here. I think that he is a guy that could challenge to start at guard in year one and could be a long-term center of the future piece. You know that Ted Karras is on an expiring deal. And this would be you talking yourself into the depth at the position of wide receiver a little bit, thinking, I think I could get better value maybe in the
Mhm.
third round. And maybe this is where I think the value maximizes for a guy like Zach Frazier, who you're kind of thinking top of day two, and then he makes it all the way to your pick in the middle of the second round. Something that I think would be strongly considered. And then the double dip, I don't think they would do it, but the double dip at defensive interior, if you want to get to Vondre Sweat, I think there's a chance this is where you would have to do it. I know he's lower here on the PFF big board, 74th on the
Yeah.
PFF big board. I know, James, you think there's a possibility he's available in the third round come draft night, but I do think that that is something you would have to consider.
I'd be shocked if they took Sweat at 49.
I would too.
I'd be
Um,
shocked.
as of today, maybe that's because you're in my ear about it uh, more than
No,
most people. But
I just think it's pretty simple. I mean, he's there. He's a really good player that has the weight risk
mhm.
and questions about his character. And I'm sure they're going to be interested, as are probably every single team, because you can't find guys like him. They're rare. At the same time, 49, there's going to be, and maybe it isn't receiver, right? Throw my theory out for a second. There's going to be a player that they have ranked in their top 33 of their board, 32, let's just say first round, that falls to 49. There will be. It's how it always works. They had Logan Wilson, for example, way higher, and they picked him in the third round. He was in the running with T. Higgins for that second round pick, right? And they were probably comfortable taking him at 40 overall that year. Just to give you an example, Dax Hill, they had really high on their board. People are going to be like, oh, why would you? Because he's really talented. And so I do wonder where Ladd falls. That's probably what I would lean. You're leaning Zach Frazier. People are going to want trenches. I'm fine with that. If you want to go that route, I wouldn't be mad at them. I do think that getting a guy like Ladd in here would be better than waiting around and settling for someone else, because I do think that he could still go in the first round. People are sleeping on him. Would not shock me at all if he's a top 32 pick.
I do think second round receiver is very tempting here, James. I think that even if it's not McConkey, and I would totally understand the argument for McConkey, the number of receivers that could be available to the Bengals in the second round will be very tempting. And you could probably get decent odds on the Bengals taking a receiver in the second round. And I think there's a decent chance of that happening. I don't know if the Bengals would pick a center a year early in the second round if they don't think he can play guard, if they don't think he can come in and compete. And we know that they're very happy with their guard duo right now. At least that's what we believe. So I think if it's me, I think I'd like the idea of Zach Frazier coming in, challenging to play guard in year one, transitioning to center with Ted Karras' contract expiring, and continuing to have stability and strength at that position and a good player there. But I would understand completely if it was wide receiver here. I just like the idea of bolstering the offensive line,
Sure.
and we've kind of missed a lot of those guys early. And Zach Frazier is the last of those really good prospects to me that you could get here.
No, I get it. I think we should go with Zach. I think it's the depth at wide receiver. It's going to be interesting to see who's there at 80 and how many of these guys are off the board at the same time. I get it. Let's add to the trenches. Hopefully he can play guard and be that interior, at worst, backup at all three spots. So we'll take Zach Frazier. and see what we can do in round 3 coming up next.
So what are we hoping for here with this 3rd round pick, James?
Offensive tackle weapons. That's what I'm hoping for.
Unfortunately, one pick ahead of the Cincinnati Bengals has been picked an offensive tackle that I'd be very fond of in the 3rd round, and that's Blake Fisher, the tackle from Notre Dame. T'Vondre Sweat has also been picked if you're hoping for the double dip in the defensive trenches, along with at wide receiver Javon Baker, Jalen McMillan, Jalen Polk, Jermaine Burton, Ladd McConkey, Roman Wilson, Ricky Pearsall.
Ladd McConkey to the Rams. Screw you, Sean McVay. Like, good God. Are you serious?
And those 3 guys, Pearsall, McConkey, Fisk, going in 3 straight picks.
I knew it.
Or sorry, Wilson, Pearsall, and McConkey. 3 straight picks. So unsurprisingly, I would say a lot of the wide receivers that we were looking at are picked. If we're looking at PFF's top of the wide receiver list, is Johnny Wilson, Jamari Thrash, Malachi Corley, Brendan Rice, Jacob Cowing, Aeneas Smith, Malik Washington, and there is a cliff coming at wide receiver.
It happened. The cliff happened.
I don't know if I think the cliff has quite happened, but we're very close to it if we're not there. A tackle.
There's a clear gap between the guys that went versus the guys that are available. Even
there's a clear gap between the 2nd round picks and the 3rd round picks. Yeah, unsurprising. A tackle, Patrick Paul and Dominic Pooney from
You're not ready
Kansas.
for what's about to happen. Yeah,
the top 2 guys there. James is going to make a fervent argument for Patrick Paul here as soon as I stop talking. At corner, Max Melton, I think, is very interesting here. At halfback, if Trey Benson is in fact available to the Bengals in the 3rd round, I don't think that would be surprising at all. I think the PFF simulator continuing to make Trey Benson available when the Bengals pick in the 3rd round is kind of crazy. At least this time, Jalen Wright isn't also available, as he's often been in the simulator lately. But tell me why we're picking Patrick Paul here, James.
Because he's the best player on the Bengals board. And this is the scary part about passing on receiver in round 2 is I don't think that Johnny Wilson will be high. I think Malachi Corley, the Bengals may look at him as a slot only. I don't think Ladd McConkey is that. And maybe they don't feel Malachi that way. They are not taking a slot only on the first 2 days of the draft. They're going to draft someone, if it's at receiver, that they feel like they can move all around and give them that versatility. To me, Patrick Paul, long, has the length they're looking for, has the size they're looking for, athletic, is good pass blocking wise. If you look at him pass blocking versus run blocking, and he doesn't have to play right away, I think that they take him. 6'7", 330, really long arms. Hey, Frank, get the most out of him. Assuming they think he's going to work hard. 36-inch arms, by the way. I think that this is the route they go. And it's funny, you mentioned that no one's aware. I've joked with Jake that they're going to take Patrick Paul for the past month. And he has squirmed and screamed. And here we go, our first mock post free agency. And I mean, are you comfortable not getting an offensive tackle? Because if you don't take Paul here, you're probably not getting an offensive tackle that you feel great about, even at 97. He may be there at 97, but probably not.
I feel like picking Patrick Paul could be picking a tackle just to be picking a tackle. That being said, there's not really another guy as I scroll through the list that stands out to me. I just want to see if Brandon Coleman is available or how far down the board here he is. I don't see him anywhere.
He's really low on the tackle list, like 6-7 rounds.
He's just extremely low on the PFF board. Brandon Coleman would be a guy from TCU that I might consider as well, in part because he might not be 23 and a half years old. We don't actually have an age on him here, but Patrick Paul is going to be 23 and a half at the time of the draft. He's going to be 24 as a rookie. He is technically not there. So if you pick Patrick Paul, you're picking a tackle that has a lot of the traits you're looking for, a lot of the athletic traits and the size that you're looking for and the length that is rare. I mean, most years, 35 plus inch arms has been very rare. This year, there's a number of guys hitting arm length thresholds, which typically we haven't seen. He tested like a really good athlete. He's been playing for a pretty long time at Houston. The problem is just that he's 23 and a half and he's coming in raw. And when you're young and you're not technically developed, it does scare me. I like Max Melton here if we're going strictly BPA. The Rutgers corner has some of the better Ohio State Marvin Harrison cornerback tape of any corner in the nation last year, and put together some pretty fun games. Max Melton is a guy that I would be considering here as well. But yeah, the wide receivers, if you're hoping for that third round receiver, are a bit uninspiring. And we just missed on like Devontae Walker, if that's the guy the Bengals would be interested in. And we just missed on Blake Fisher, if that's the guy the Bengals would be interested in, and Javon Baker by 10 picks or so. I don't know that the Bengals are moving for any of these guys here with their first third round pick.
The one I would be interested in is Malachi Corley. I just know that they wouldn't take him necessarily if they don't think he can play outside too at this stage. I think they would take slot onlys later, certainly, but not at this stage of the draft. I would be in on Malachi Corley here, actually, but I don't necessarily think they would be, certainly ahead of a guy like Patrick Paul, who they've been willing to draft older prospects in recent years. And I think that they would be comfortable doing that here. So I'm going to make you do it, Jake. Squirm all you want. Patrick Paul, you are a Bengal. With the
so pick. I could see how this pick works is that he doesn't have to play right away, and they can work out some of the issues, the quote unquote issues that they think he has to work with. But I don't love it. I'm just going to be on record saying I mean, in the third round, I can live with it, I guess. But again, it feels like you're picking a tackle just to pick a tackle to me.
The Bengals' last hit, if you want to call it a hit, but their most productive offensive lineman they've drafted since Jonah was 24 in his first year. I think that they'll look at his length, his size, and if they haven't addressed offensive tackle yet, be like, hey, you can't teach those things. Let's roll with him. So
I think there is some difference between those draft classes in this year, just because those are more inundated with COVID players, like COVID extra year players. This year still has some of those, but most of those you're talking about in later rounds. And one of them that I was going to mention, and I don't know if he got picked. Let's look back at the wide receivers, because now we have an extra third round pick for the first time since we've done this exercise. Jacob Cowing out of Arizona, a guy that we know the Bengals were at the pro day, put him through a workout, and according to, I think, Tony Pauline, expressed some interest in a guy that I think is a slot receiver there from Arizona and Cowing.
Yeah, and I think that's a day. I don't even know if he's in the running here. If you think he's a slot only for the Bengals, I think they would think, all right, pick 115, 116. That's when you do it, the start of day 3, sort of like they did last year. But to me, this is when you're in the running back range where it starts to become a real conversation. Again, we don't think Trey Benson would be there at pick 80, so we didn't really entertain that. We want to be realistic. Audric Estime, certainly someone they've paid attention to at Notre Dame. That would be someone in this range I think they would consider if you're looking running back. I think that this is where things really open up, and you could see them going a bunch of different ways and really going not just BPA, but you have a tackle, you have an offensive tackle, you have a defensive tackle, and you've just the interior of your offensive line as well. Have we really gone 3 trench picks? I would be shocked if they go 3 trench picks in a row, by the way. I would be shocked if they do that.
We haven't even mentioned tight end. I mean, we did talk about Brock Bowers a little bit, but Ben Sinnott at the end of the third round with that extra third round pick. I know that he's lower on the PFF board. I wonder where he gets picked in the real draft in a couple of weeks here. If he's going to be a 4th round pick, if he's going to be a 3rd round pick. Eric All has suddenly picked up a bunch of steam. I've seen him in 3rd rounds in mocks lately. I'm not there for Eric All. Cade Stover from Ohio State in the 3rd round. A similar player in some ways in terms of caliber of player. In some ways, not saying that these are directly comparable to Ben Sinnott, but Sinnott would be an interesting consideration here as well.
Sure. I think they could. I also think that they're going to look at all of these positions, and there's one that stands out to me of guys on the board, and this will not happen, but there's one guy that stands above the rest. I'll have you guess. Who do you think that I'm all in on right here?
Mike Hall?
Yeah. We talk too much. Yeah. If Mike Hall Jr. is there, and I know you picked Johnny Newton, but if Mike Hall Jr. is there, it's really tough for me to say no. And so this is the scenario, at least for me, Jake, where everyone says, all right, trenches round 1 or trenches round 2. Well, looking back at this mock, I would rather have Amarius Mims round 1. I certainly think that whatever you do round 2, but you could have went Lad McConkey round 2. Round 3, you don't feel like you have to go with Patrick Paul. You could have taken Max Melton the corner or Trey Benson. And then round 4 here, I already like this mock better. You go with Michael Hall Jr. Like that's the point of these exercises. And so we just did this mock and pick whoever, but the one I just said, I think I would be more comfortable with for sure.
The Mike Hall pick, we're double dipping. We're going all trenches.
We can. Yeah, that's fine. But I'm just saying, like, if we had gone Mims, McConkey, Hall in round 4, and then Melton with that first third rounder.
Yeah.
I feel really darn good about that draft.
That's the issue I have every time I try to not take a tackle in the first round. If you don't get one of the guys you like in the second round, and maybe that's where we should have taken Blake Fisher. I mean, he goes almost a full round later in this PFF mock, and it's hard to get a feel in these simulators right now for what's realistic for some of these guys, especially once you get out of the top, 13, 14 picks. That's where I've always struggled in these exercises when it's not a first round offensive tackle. If you want to get an offensive tackle in this draft, it is top heavy, in my opinion. It falls off precipitously and quickly. And that's how we end up picking 4 trench players here. We didn't even get to go to the skill players. Like maybe it's Estime here. Maybe I wonder what they think of Will Shipley. We're not going to have time to talk about Will Shipley, the Clemson running back, but Estime would fit a lot of the things they like if they want to go for a skill position here. But that's why I struggle without taking a first round tackle so often.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough when you do that. And so it's our first mock in a while. And it's going to be fun because Mock Draft Monday is back. Draft Talk is back. All of these scenarios certainly are back. And we appreciate you listening to Locked On Bengals, where we get 2 A's and 2 B's. What's the overall grade, Jake? Scroll down.
It's going to be an A minus.
A minus, baby. That's the goal. All trenches. It's not going to happen, but for our trench lovers out there, enjoy this mock. I will not let this happen again, Jake. I will not.
I don't even know if the trench lovers like these players or not. I don't know, but
they should.
When you don't take a tackle in the first round, an offensive tackle in the first round, there are probably trade up opportunities that we missed, to be honest. Like there's probably a trade up in the second round that I would be thinking about aggressively for a certain tackle prospect if he were available. I don't know which one, but I don't know which one went in the early second in this one, but like I'd be trying to trade up if I draft a defensive tackle in the first round and there's offensive tackles that I like in the top of the second. And we didn't really discuss that today either.
Yeah, I agree. Some of those trade ups will be interesting. They will trade up in this draft with 10 picks. Yeah. And I'm not sure they'll be willing to move any of their top 100 picks since they have 4, but they should be able to get really, really good players. Again, the Mims, McConkey, Melton Hall scenario feels much better than Newton, Frazier, Paul, Hall to me.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you can't make the picks after the rest of the picks.
Rewind. Happened. Let's redo the
start
show.
over. Oh, dang it. We spent all this time.
Well, at least do our outro and then we'll start over.
Just in case we use this in the future sometime. That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.